All right, hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your boy, your favorite conservatarian, contrarian, Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got another fire conversation for you guys today. It's going to be all about guns. We all love guns, don't we? And we're all talking about guns. And, over the past few months, it's been a hot topic. So I have a very special guest, very knowledgeable. You're going to love it. But before we get into everything, you know what you got to do. I shouldn't even have to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I need you to like this video. I need you to share this video. And if you haven't already subscribed, I don't know what you're doing with your life. I don't know what you're thinking. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. That way you will be notified whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern. So, also, if you want to support my work monetarily, I've got all the links in the show notes below. I've got the Venmo app, the CashApp, the PayPal app, and all the apps. Every little bit counts and helps me to bring you this awesome content. So now that we've got that out of the way, without further ado, I want to just go ahead and bring him on. I've got Mickey Schuch from Carry Trainer. And, he has a lot of other things that he does, but it would take me years to list them off. So I'm going to let him give you a little bit of an idea of what he does. But first, welcome to the program, Mickey.
Thank you. I very much appreciate you having me on, Mr. Charles. Thank you very much. What do I do? Is that the question?
Yeah, tell us about yourself. Who are you?
I think in a nutshell, I am a guy that tries to and does take what people try to overcomplicate, the concepts of self-defense, self-protection, and make them easily understood for the common person. You don't need to be a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret to protect yourself. And even if you're not one of those things, you still should be quite capable of it, because most violence that happens in our world happens to everyday people. So we are advocates of understanding best practices and not living a life of fear, but living a good life. So that's really the synopsis of what we do. We wrap concepts like health, wellness, happiness into that. If we're spending our life training to fight some foe that may never appear and probably will not, even though the news shows us violence every day, statistically speaking, most of us are going to go our whole life without ever needing to strike somebody or use a weapon to protect ourselves, which is awesome. But we do all have the same issues of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, stroke, obesity, plaguing our society because of the lifestyles that we choose. So that's also a big part of the things that we talk about and think about. If we're spending our time trying to get good at self-defense, then if you truly care about protecting yourself, protect your body and your mind, your soul, your heart, all of that stuff.
And I think I saw you mention that on one of your videos that I watched. And it's funny, when we think of self-defense, we think of defending it from another person. But you're right, there are other issues that we need to defend ourselves from as well, whether it's mental, physical, spiritual. So I really like that approach. Now, I mean, you do a lot. I mean, you have 2 YouTube channels, you run companies, you're educating people. How did you even get into the space in the first place?
It's a good question, man. So I talk about a few different paths that kind of led me to this point, and I've talked about them in other programs. One of them, the short version, is a dear family friend was murdered when we were teenagers. I don't need to tell the whole story to share that it was deeply impactful to me to lose somebody that was near and dear to us. She was brutally raped, brutally murdered, stabbed dozens and dozens of times with a small pocket knife. I sat through the court proceedings as a 16-year-old, watching this impish little man that did it, and thought to myself, like, what would have changed this? What could have changed this? And, we watch movies and we see, like, Karate Kid's a good one. Some dorky little guy learns some karate and now he can beat up a bunch of bad guys. The truth is, that's bullshit. And most martial arts that are trained where you can go to some strip mall and get a black belt in 2 years, or your 8-year-old's a black belt, it's bullshit. And people hear me say this and they say, well, that's, what do you mean it's BS? Like these, more than these instructors. The fact of the matter is, something that you're putting into yourself, in the case of martial arts, for example, if it's truly valuable to you, it's not something you're going to learn in a little bit of time. It's not something your 8-year-old's going to pick up and become a master in. That's just garbage. And why I am talking about that at this point, you said, how did I get into it? It became something that dominated my thoughts for a short time as a young man. I live in an area of the country that is pretty rural. If I step outside my door, I'm looking at thousands of acres of farmland in every direction, pretty much. I joke with people. I say I can see to Iowa when the sun sets. I'm about an hour outside of Chicago, but it's pretty rural out this way. Then 30 years ago, when I was a kid, this was one of the largest dairy producing counties in the Midwest. County fairs and nice parades and just Americana. So something like a brutal rape and murder, something that would be normal in Chicago or Philly or Houston or New Orleans, just didn't happen out here.
It's unheard of. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. So that deeply affected the way that I saw the world. I think we all have moments like that in our life. It could be probably most of us knew kids in high school that died in a car crash, drinking and driving or racing. Like that's pretty normal. Every year, some high school around every community has some kids that crash a car and die. And that affects kids in different ways. This deeply affected me. I think that was one component of it. I came from a family. My parents had 11 kids, and I was one of the oldest in the family. I had 6 little brothers, 2 older sisters, and 2 younger sisters, and a pretty religious family. My father was a minister. Kind of grew up in a little bit different way than most people. My parents did the best they knew how, and it was an interesting existence that kind of painted a certain narrative of what I thought the world was, which it wasn't when I got a little older. Sometimes as parents, we do our best to protect our kids, and sometimes we do some damage in that process. I guess what I mean by that is I had a worldview from my childhood that isn't what the world is at all.
Was it more sugar-coated or more sheltered, or
we were pretty sheltered from the world, yet at the same time, violence was pretty normal around me. Violence in the home, things like what am I driving at? And I don't want to offend anybody based on their religious beliefs, but the sect of Christianity that I was raised in is full of some really batshit crazy people. How's that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, actually.
I mean, people that are more concerned about talking about demons and crap like that than they are paying their bills on time or being a good mom and dad. Just having children sign agreements that they will be celibate until married, and they're married to Jesus. All the while, there's some weird ass pedophile stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
None of that stuff ever happened to me, but just folks that as I got older, I realized a lot of it was fear. This stuff comes about because they fear what happens after they die. So they craft a narrative around their life that will give them something. And I'm not telling anybody how to think or be. So if any of your listeners are offended, that's not my intent, but that shaped some of what I started to think about as an adult. It was constant fear. It took me into my mid-20s to realize that every day there was fear pumped into me all around me. Fear of hell, fear of damnation, fear of judgment from God Almighty, fear of doing the wrong thing because it would lead people to think ill of you. Fear just permeated things. And anybody that knows me knows that that's probably the opposite of how I think as an adult. I'm very deeply involved in hunting. As a child, I remember in 8th grade, our yearbook, I went to a private Lutheran school, which was a great little school. There was uh, if you go look in the yearbook, my hero was Daniel Boone. Because I just was
Okay.
so enamored with the concept of just like leaving off into the wilderness. And Daniel Boone was a great American explorer and adventurer, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. So I spent all my
Did you
free
have the
time.
hat?
I did not. I mean, I wasn't like trying to emulate him, but you're thinking of Davey Crockett, by the way.
Oh yeah, that is Davey
Yeah,
Crockett.
you're thinking of Davey Crockett, who died at the Alamo down there in Texas.
That's right. I'm totally getting them mixed up.
Spilling my coffee here. No, that's often two men that were put together. Daniel Boone pushed across the frontier into Kentucky, and
that's right.
Really found a lot of what other settlers moved west. But I was enamored by that, by the out of doors. I was the kid. Like nowadays, this EDC thing people talk about, everyday carry. I always had a backpack on me as a boy with a medical kit, a little tarp line in there that I could make a shelter out of. We were always camping, some fishing gear, clean shirt, some dry socks. I just always had this stuff with me, a bottle of water, a snack or two that was like quite normal. We grew up in the rural area where my buddies and I in the summertime would be on our bikes away from home constantly, fishing and screwing around, building tree forts, playing in ponds. And so I love the outdoors. I love hunting and fishing and that kind of stuff, which led me, of course, to firearms. And I love our American history. I'm not a historian professionally, but I spend 50% of what I consume is our American history. And I like to look at it in its raw form. An example of that, as I was just traveling this past week, as I travel about, I try to find whatever history of our nation is where I'm at, and I go see it. So I just visited the Berkeley Plantation in Virginia on the James River, and pretty interesting place. It was one of our 56 signers of our Declaration, Benjamin Harrison, not the president. His son and great-grandson were presidents. He was the owner there. There was a shipyard there. It was a huge slaveholding plantation. There was stuff that went on there during the Civil War. To this day, though, it pretty much looks like it did in 1700. I walked the fields as I was there. They're still farming it to this day. And it's pretty moving to look at that. I sat down by the river. I actually shared something on Instagram. I'm by myself there. It's this huge, like 1,000, 2,000 acre plantation. Benjamin Harrison's buried there. So I went to visit his grave. That's kind of one of the things I like to do. I visit the graves of the signers of the Declaration. And I sat there by this river, which is a very famous waterway in our American history. And I just thought about like the dichotomy of ideas. Here's this guy signing the Declaration while the fields that I'm sitting in were full of enslaved people that were probably washing their clothes in the river that I'm watching in front of me. I've got to read through the manifests of the slaves that the slave keeper, and most manifests of slaves list the slaves a certain way. And this one was a very particular one. Whoever kept this manifest listed them as in value of the individual to the owner. So Jeff's awesome at digging fields, Mickey's awesome at blacksmithing or whatever. And so they quantified them in value to the property owner, not by name or age. And like just staring
like
at
buying a car.
Yeah. Pretty much. This thing's great at hauling ass up mountain passes. This one's great at family stuff. Pretty much. So I guess you asked me who I am, what I do. I've gone deep into this study of our history so that I can understand who these people were, because I got involved in lobbying for firearm rights, which to me, the First and Second Amendment are oh so important to the proliferation of our republic, for it to continue.
Yes.
It's hard to articulate and argue who we are and where we're going if we don't know who we were. And I think we do ourselves a great disservice if we just look at the high points, the high watermarks. We look at Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, right, or Martin Luther King's famous speech, or things like that. We look at these high watermarks. We don't look at Martin Luther King with what he was doing in his kitchen table at night, the shit he was writing. We don't look at what James Madison was doing as he was writing letters back and forth to other founders. I mean, people do, but we make these generalities and we toss out these little quips and phrases like, give me dangerous liberty. It's this, like, what the hell does that even mean? What does that even mean? So I have tasked myself with understanding as much as possible. And the way I look at it isn't to say, look what I know. It's to say, if farm kid who spent most of his life as a carpenter can understand this stuff, then so too can anybody else.
So, I mean, and that's important. That's a very important point that you made. And it kind of ties back into something that you said at the beginning, where you say that, you don't have to be a Green Beret to learn how to defend yourself, but you also don't have to be a historical scholar to understand these issues that we debate over today. I mean, when you're talking about the Second Amendment, you're talking about getting deep into the history of why that amendment was created, what it was for, what they were thinking when they were doing it. All of that stuff is important to understand the context that these folks were living in, and also how this applies to us now, because there are differences. Because like you say, you were on that plantation that 100, 150 years ago, slaves were working on, and now you're there. And I could go there as a free man and watch what was happening. There is a dichotomy. There is something different. And it's important to understand those nuances. I mean, we don't really get into that history anymore. We have like bumper sticker history where we have a lot of slogans. We memorize a lot of dates. I was talking to another guest, Rick Green, about this. Like, history is more focused on memorizing dates and things like that, rather than actually digging into who these people were and what they were dealing with. So I'm glad that I'm actually glad that you told that story, because that illustrates how we should all be approaching these things. We may not all need to travel to Virginia, but at the same time, I think a lot of the problems that we're facing is a result of the average person not understanding the history, not understanding what our republic is, what it's supposed to be doing. A lot of people can't even tell you what the Constitution is for. I mean, they think, the Constitution gives us our rights. No, that's not what the founders said. It's supposed to protect our rights that were given to us by God. And, as I go on and as I do more of this, I find that so many people just don't know. And it's important to have people like you out there to educate them, because I know you do a lot of education, you do a lot of lobbying, and I'm sure you run into a lot of these things. Well, what would you say are some of like the when it comes to the Second Amendment and the people who are maybe on the anti-gun side or maybe lean that way? What are like the most common misconceptions that you run into when you interact with these folks?
Well, let's just look at the verbiage of the Second Amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms, right? So we start to look at, here's the first problem. When Jefferson, for example, Thomas Jefferson talked about how they drafted things like the Constitution. When I say how they drafted, I mean down to the specific words. These guys were so forward thinking. They knew some point in the future, people might not talk like we do. I mean, they literally talked about this. And so they used Old English law. They used the context of Old English law, because to this day, our laws, if you go to court in America, our laws are based a lot on Old English law and Latin, right? For example, you go to any court proceeding, much of the verbiage, especially when you're talking about conversations between trial counsel and judge or prosecutor is in Latin. It's why I'm bringing this up is they were trying to figure out a way that posterity, us, people after them, understood what their intent was. So misconceptions come about when we try to interpret verbiage from 250 years ago in our modern language. What did you say this podcast was going to be during your introduction? Did you say fire? Is that a term?
Fire conversation. Yeah.
So right there. I mean, just look at that. Like, that's pretty new to me. Friends of mine use that word. Kids I know use that word. I haven't adopted it. It's not a good or bad thing. It just doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my friends, oh, dude, you got to try this beer. It's fire. Well, imagine 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, if you said, hey, Jeff, try this beer. It's fire. You'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Does it burn your mouth?
Yeah.
Or, bro, man, that freaking movie was so cool. Was it cold? Right? I'm just an example. Right. So vernacular changes, well-regulated. So that's the term that anti-gunners fixate on, well-regulated. I did a video on this once, and there's on our YouTube channel, there are tons of comments. Mickey, you're an idiot. How do you not know what regulated means? And they go take a phrase out of Webster's or one of the modern dictionaries, and they are quoting regulated in the sense of this modern understanding of the English language. Well, if we go back to 1770, 1650, 1800, the word regulated means something completely different. In fact, even through like the history of our expansion west, we can think of like cowboy movies, regulars, mount up. They're like, if you remember that term used in like the talking about like you're from Texas, the regulators that were the guys that were out patrolling the plains. They were there trained. That's what that word means. Regulated meant ready, trained up, ready to go.
Right.
The idea on the flip side, we have a lot of young men less than 40 that don't remember things like the Clinton era gun bans. They also have this I have dear friends that argue with me that are intelligent business guys in the space that I'm in. Maybe they own companies related to the firearm industry, and they think any law pertaining to guns is illegal. Well, that's not true either. The founders the Constitution doesn't say no law can be created against guns. I'm reading a book right now a friend of mine gave me, and it's was written. Well, I'll tell you when it was written in a minute. It's all about self-defense with handguns, and it's a little book, maybe 60 or 80 pages thick, and the first 5 pages talks about, it's laying some context. The author's laying some context, and he's talking about one, handguns are usually only used by criminals. 2, handguns are not real guns. And why he's saying this is because they just, the time that this book was written, handguns sucked. You didn't go hunting with them. You didn't go to war with them. They were a subpar weapon. And they were really used for nefarious intent a lot of times. Sam Colt and guys like that created the semi-automatic guns and made them more popular. But the book was written in 1875. And part of what the author was talking about was that it was illegal in many places to even carry a pistol. And the challenge we have is when we hear something like that, we say, okay, well, just because the government did something wrong in 1875 doesn't mean it should be wrong now.
Right.
I'm not suggesting it's right or wrong, but what it tells us is that the culture of the people, we the people, is always in flux. And if at 1875, as far back as 1675, the concealed carry of weapons was illegal in many places. I have got a friend that his father was a sheriff at the turn of the century, grandfather rather, and he has a sign at his house that was in the outskirts of town that stated, "Stop at the sheriff's office and check your gun in." This was around 1900, 1910 before going into town. That's pretty normal stuff. if we heard that now, hey, as you come into Anytown, USA, stop by this office and drop your gun off, people would freak the F out, right?
Yes.
And I'm not suggesting that that's right or wrong. I merely want people. I guess where I'm going with this is so many gun 100 years ago, everybody had a concealed blaster under their coat. Everybody had a shotgun in the back window, right? We hear this constantly. Oh, when I went to high school, every kid had a shotgun in the back window.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I knew guys, including myself, that were, when I was a teenager, I had my own firearms and access to them at will. I wouldn't hurt somebody with them because I didn't want to hurt people with them. And I was scared to death if I did anything wrong, not only would I get beat or jailed, but I'd lose my they'd get taken away, right? Like just that alone. I like these things. I don't want them taken away, so I wouldn't do bad things. So back to your question of like what misconceptions, I think it's a very nuanced question, right? Why did they draft this thing? Well, immediately, what do we say on the gun loving side? It was to fight tyranny. Well, some of it was that. It was also understood a free and natural man, a free man and natural right is to do as you want to. I mean, if I want to smoke weed, which I don't, I should be able to smoke weed. If I want to be able to dig a hole in my yard and bury a car in my yard, I'm just making shit up, I should be able to do that. I think we have a fine line though between freedom and all of a sudden chaos, and that's where the wheels fall off, because go back again to our founding, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So guys like Sam Adams, Anti-Federalist. Sam Adams said, I don't want a constitution. I don't want all of this stuff put on paper, because once we put it on paper, now you're going to make more stuff on paper. You're going to start telling me what I can and cannot do. Every one of these guys, though, that was on the other side, the Federalists knew, hey, man, not everybody's like you, Sam. You understand some common sense. I mean, let's look at all the videos that just popped up online over the 4th of July weekend. Minneapolis, dudes driving downtown, shooting huge display-size fireworks at buildings, at cars, at people. That's freedom, right? I would take that as a physical threat to my life, and I would deal with that accordingly, right? That's not funny. It's not a bottle rocket.
Yeah.
And so that's like one half of the equation. Like people, I have a friend of mine whose neighbor just decided to put a fence on his property, and it turned into a $200,000 legal battle. So without laws, which is what our Constitution is, it's an agreement between we the people. It just gives us like a framework and how to operate. We know that people are not nice. We have rules like no burning in city limits. Why? Well, you could burn a neighbor's house down. Why else? Somebody's got asthma. Why else? It's dirty and can pollute the air. I mean, you just keep adding things. Well, are you just burning leaves and some sticks, or are you the asshole that had a bunch of garbage in your garage and now you're burning some plastic and some tarps and a chunk of tire? And that's how we get Mogadishu, right? Where you get some slums. So the concept of what liberty is, people need to understand why this was drafted. The founders knew people are jackasses, and left uncontrolled. Eventually we revert. So let's go back a step further. Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu. These were the philosophers that guys like Jefferson and Adams looked to. Go read Hobbes and Locke and Montesquieu, and they did not all agree. I don't agree with everything these men wrote, but they were philosophers that talked about our world and civilization, right? Look at guys like Machiavelli. And there's some truth to what all of these people looked at, but most of them understood and had this concept of like the natural state of things. And if left unchecked, and this is the discussion, what is checked? But if left unchecked, we revert to a state of nature pretty quickly. And there will be people like me that have some skills that will build a freaking house out in the woods because I'm a carpenter and I'll figure it out.
Right.
And I know how to dig a well and I know how to do stuff. And there are other people that will come steal other people's things.
Yep.
And there are other people that will just suck their thumb and die. People will revert to their natural state. And our founders understood that. So when we talk about like the big picture and we just say these little quips like, well, the AR-15 didn't exist in those days. You can't look at it like that. That's a very sophomoric, immature viewpoint. It's not just about the tool. It's not just about the tool. It's about everything that encompassed it and what stands behind it, which is, are we free men or are we not? And what does that mean? And I think a lot of people are more content with a life of safety and security over that. Often misquoted, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter, and one section of it, I'm going to pull it up so I don't butcher it. One section of it is often quoted, and it's out of context. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So oftentimes we think about that, we hear that, and we think, oh, Franklin knew what he was talking about. He was saying we need to not give up liberty because that's what he means. The context of that letter was actually literally him talking to another man about purchasing armed security. And it was something it was like, I just challenge you, look up that quote and go read the context of it. And so there's something we cherry pick out of a letter. And then like a brother of mine says, well, even if what you're saying is true, the quote still makes sense the way that we interpret it.
The way we understand
well,
it.
I guess it could make sense, except if you're saying that that's what Benjamin Franklin meant. No, it doesn't make sense. So back to your question, and I'll shut up. What do we get wrong? We get a lot of it wrong because we're trying to talk about something as complex as the human body and just look at little one sentence answers. I think it requires broad depth and breadth of understanding of what these people were trying to do.
I think so too. I mean, I think we don't have a holistic understanding of this issue, like we've been talking about, and it's really unfortunate because it's not like this is taught in schools. So when you're talking to people about this, you're talking to people who really have no concept of the Second Amendment, why it was even created, what the Constitution itself, and why we should still have those rights today.
Yes.
And I think it's causing a lot of problems. But I mean, on the positive side, though, I think that for the pro-gun rights community, I mean, we have been seeing some victories. I mean, we got the Supreme Court decision on the New York Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. We've got record numbers of people buying guns. I mean, I think for the 35th consecutive month, you've got more than 1 million new gun sales. Even the polling shows that just by a slight margin, more Americans still favor more restrictive gun control measures, but that margin has been closing. That gap has been closing for years, and it's probably going to flip pretty soon. Mm-hmm. So based on what you're seeing, what is bringing this about?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. For years, I have argued that we are safer than we've ever been. I still think that. In the big scheme of history, right? Go to Chicago or a place like that and hang out in an area that's maybe known for crime and maybe you're not as safe, but we live longer. and we live better than we really ever have. I mean, maybe you could go to like 1952 to a certain part of town, but let's be honest, if I was your skin color and I went to a certain part of town, I might not be safe. Or if you were my skin color and I went to a certain part of town. So things have changed, I think, in a lot of ways where we're safer. But on the other side, we have put violence under a microscope and also under a magnifying glass now, where social media, the internet. Remember when we were kids? We're probably near the same age. And of course, if you're older than us, the newspaper came out in the morning. Maybe there was a nightly news edition for a big city that had a nightly news edition. And then the news came on 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever.
Right.
And you would sit on the floor and your dad or mom would turn the news on and you'd hear Tom Brokaw or whoever. This is the news. And I'm going to tell you what the fuck we figured out today and blah, blah, blah. And you were like, oh my God. And you'd hear the thing. And then maybe you'd be watching a program and they'd interrupt and they'd say, here's some more news on that thing that we figured out. And it'd be like a little 10-second thing, right? The moon is still in the sky and whoa, holy shit, it's still up there. And then that was it. Now, I mean, I just yesterday was shopping for something. I don't remember what it was. But of course, the way the internet works is I am bombarded by 800 things. This morning I was shopping for something. One of the things that I was bombarded by is this girl's bikini shocked Instagram. Like, so that's news. That literally came up. I'm sitting there. I'm like, man, I'm trying to figure this shit out. And here's a chick's cooch hanging out. Like, this is just bombarding you. So we are bombarded by stuff, or the Highland Park shooter, or this solar flare is happening on the sun today. And so we have fixated, just like COVID's a perfect example. Everybody's a frickin' biologist, chemist, PhD, doc now. And in many cases, there's some truth to that because we have been exposed to so much information regarding infectious diseases that we all have a body of knowledge that we didn't have before. But when it's in your face so much by choice, because you choose to look at this shit, it becomes more relevant. Your question about why people are buying guns, if you just open your phone up or the computer screen at any given moment, you will think that you are in peril at any moment.
Imminent danger.
At any moment. So many of our students, I'm a firearms instructor. When I started training with firearms, and when I say training with, I don't mean going out in my backyard and shooting some clay pigeons. I mean professionally being trained in the craft of self-protection or self-defense, using it as a weapon, was the early 2000s. And even that long ago, which wasn't that long ago, this space like that I'm in didn't exist. There was only maybe 20 or so people that were well known. Of course, there'd be like little pockets of guys, and they were some geeky, frickin' Star Wars loving guy in like some little town that, like, you know, you could go to his backyard range and learn some stuff. Most of them were competitive shooters. And I had a guy named Bob Housingay, police chief in Comanche, Iowa, 6-time, 8-time national shooting champ, something like that. Excellent. There's a video of him on YouTube called How Fast is Fast. Go watch that. It's old, VHS converted digital. But Bob, to go to his class, you had to call his wife, Rosalie, would say, who are you? And you'd say who you were. And she'd say, why do you want to come to class? And you'd give your explanation. They would physically mail you a paper form that you'd fill out. My name's Mickey. I want to come to this class. Then I had to go to either the sheriff's office, the state's attorney's office, or get a judge to swear out an affidavit that I was a lawful person. And this was very normal. This was only in the early 2000s. Now there are 9, and this is, I only say this because the context of what we're talking about, people forget, or they don't know. They just assume, oh, there's always been thousands of guys that you can train. NRA had training programs, which was very much fundamental manipulations with a gun and safety, which are very good programs, regardless of what people say. They're very good programs that build safe gun handling and good respect of weapons. But this stuff didn't exist. So now I ask people, hey, like, how long you been training? People that come to our classes. It used to be people that have been doing it for years, had a depth of knowledge. They had volumes of books like this on the subject. That's a display for our podcast room. I've got 1,000 books. I've got thousands of books, but I've got 1,000 books on the art of shooting and weapons craft, written as far back as the 1600s to present.
Oh, wow.
That's what people like me used to do, because there's none of this stuff was on the internet. You'd read old books. You'd go talk to old soldiers. You'd go talk to the war on terror has created this explosion of people with skills, right? And then the shooting sports. That's really where a lot of this skill comes from. So people are scared and they want to have a way to deal with it. We have given up our ability to protect ourselves by free choice. We have become complacent in our duties as parents, as adults. I travel all over the country. Just a quick thing to wrap my point up. This week, I will be leaving to drive to Washington State. That's 2,500 and some odd miles one way. I do this all the time. I drive 40, 50,000 miles a year. I get to see all of our land. As I leave, I take a 5-gallon can of fresh gas. I've got not one, but 2 jacks. I've got two trailer tires, or 2 spares for my trailer. I've got food, water. Of course, I'm on the interstate and I can stop all kinds of places, but there are stretches of road where you are 50 or 100 miles from anything. In the summertime, I think of different things than I do in the wintertime. This is normal to me, but I am always amazed at how many people don't just have what we call common sense, right? Like, where am I going? What do I need to get there? What might I need if I have a problem? And we've due to the nature of how we have crafted this society, which is lovely, our food is brought to us. When I was a kid, when I was a child, we'd slaughter 100 chickens, and I can take a live living chicken. I take no pleasure in it. And within seconds, its head will be off. I can pull its entrails out. I can do this to a dove. I can do it to a duck. I can do it to a pheasant, and have it prepared to eat in 4 or 5 minutes, if that's what we wanted to do. Now we go to a store and it's washed, it's cleaned. They even spray freaking bleach on them to make sure that there's no listeria or E. coli on it. It's wrapped up nice and tight. And that's how we get our meat. Oh, I don't want to see any blood. Are dead. We have a loved one pass away. Fuck, hands off. Make the phone calls. We got to get the police out here. We got to get a coroner out here. We got to get a funeral home out here. And then they got to pump that dead body full of a bunch of chemicals so that we can paint them up creepily to make them look like something. And then we're going to bury them in a concrete box with a steel box inside of it with a rubber gasket. Because fuck, we don't want them to break down. We don't want any natural processes to occur. I just can't imagine my loved one becoming dust again. That's weird. Yeah. That's weird. Yeah. And I'm not saying we should bury people in our front yard, but that's a new phenomenon. That's actually something worth looking at. After Abraham Lincoln was killed, they say his body was the most viewed body in history because they embalmed him, which was a fairly new thing in the Americas, and drove him all over behind a train, and people got to see him, and people thought, hey, this is kind of cool. I want to be embalmed too. I'm off topic, but we've created a society where we don't need to. It's too easy. It's too easy. And you know what? Even if you're a bum and you don't want to work, somebody will take care of you. You can go get a program to give you money. You can get a program to put your kids in daycare. You can get a program where your kids, dude, during COVID here, I live in a pretty affluent place as far as like the whole world is concerned. I'm a 1%er as far as the world population is concerned. During COVID, the school buses drove around all the neighborhoods with lunches and breakfasts. I do believe breakfast too. And anybody that walked outside and walked up to the bus got a lunch. And there's houses around me that are worth $1 million. Does a school bus really need to come to the end of your driveway to give you a shitty school lunch? And they were doing that to keep people working at the school. I get that. But
Yeah.
I mean, just think about how fucked up that is. In my head, it
Yeah.
is. I mean, other people would say, no, it's great. Our government doesn't exist to give people jobs. It exists to protect our rights and provide the services that we, the people, want. I don't need to pay to give people lunches. I'll shut up. I'm talking too much.
So basically, so you would say that maybe one of the reasons why more people are buying guns is because of the fear factor, or because
I think that's the biggest thing. I do. The more I talk to people, it's like stocks, right? The smart people see the future. Man, this Jeff Charles company is going to take off. It might not be a couple years, but he's got this thing. It's freaking awesome. I'm going to invest some money. And all of a sudden, everybody gets on board and all the dipshits buy it once it's come to the top, right? You know what I'm talking about? That's the same thing. People are now, they want to get in on it. I need to be able to protect myself. I also want to do this before the government tries to take it away. Over the last 15 or so years, every time presidential elections, 20 years would change, friends and family would call me and be like, hey, I gotta get something. All right, let's go buy you a Glock 17 or a Glock 19 and a good AR. We'll get about 12, 13 mags, 20 mags for each, and start buying ammo. Like, why do I need that? Because it's good stuff. We'll just get you a Glock and an AR. And I don't know how many people I have taken to the store and handed them a Glock 17 or a Glock 19 and a good AR and put a little red dot on her and a sling, and away we go. Because they want that. And then those same people, that stuff is in the box in their basement somewhere or in a gun safe, and they've never touched it. But they checked the box.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, see, and I want to get to that in a second. But yeah, that's I've heard that's a big issue. Like, people just get the guns and then they don't really do anything with them. They collect dust.
Well, how many people have a freaking Jazzercise video or P90X or something like that they buy, or some weightlifting equipment that is really nothing more than a big dresser for all your shit hanging on it, or even a motorcycle. I know guys that go out, they think they want a motorcycle and they maybe are not comfortable riding, but they go buy the thing, or a boat, and it just sits because you like the idea of it, but you're pretty set in your ways. I don't know how many guys sign up for jiu-jitsu at our gym and they come once or twice and then I never see them again. So you should not dabble in weapons. You should not dabble in things that can maim and kill. You should not, just vehicles, power tools, chainsaws, anything like that. You shouldn't dabble in it. You should invest real energy in it, or don't do it at all. That's kind of the way I look at it.
So, okay. So, and before we go too much into that, I also wanted to ask about, the mass shootings that we've been having. I mean, we've had one in Buffalo, New York, Uvalde, and now in Highland Park near you. And of course, this always leads to the conversation about guns and banning guns or whatever, or changing the age limit or what have you. But I mean, people like you and I know that most of that stuff doesn't work. How would you, I mean, as a proponent of the Second Amendment and as a gun rights advocate, how would you propose that we cut down on these mass shootings that we've been seeing? Or is there even a way to do it?
This to me, I'm not an anthropologist. Like I said, I'm not a scientist or a scholar, but let's look at some facts. Let's just say we ban guns tomorrow. There are millions of firearms. They're not going anywhere. So that cat's out of the bag. That Pandora's box is open. Now, we could say, if we had this like long-term view, okay, maybe 50, if we stop manufacture, for example, we just, as a society, we ban all manufacturing. So they stop making new ones. The real thing would be to limit ammunition. That's how you would deal with it. You just stop the production or sale of the components to actually shoot the guns. If you were trying to really limit them, which is not that hard to do because there's only a handful of primer manufacturers and things like that. We all just saw how that happened.
Right.
So let's just imagine that we did that. That doesn't change what's in men's hearts. And I don't like, I'll share videos on our Instagram page. It pisses me off. Flippant comments piss me off. I think there's a time for sarcasm. There's a time for humor. I shared a video yesterday. It's horrible to watch. A man is stabbed in his thoracic cavity. You watch him bleed out and die. So it's a video of the last moments of somebody's life. I don't share that to get views. There's a very hard couple of lessons there.
Yeah.
But you will see anytime a video like that is put anywhere online, if you just scroll comments, you'll see this: ban knives, or somebody crashes a car into somebody, ban cars.
Ban cars,
don't be a dumbass. Like, that's that kind of an argument. That's an 8-year-old's argument. Like, I understand your point. Don't be an idiot. Like, let's not even waste the energy having this stupid argument, because you're not going to ban knives or cars. I get it's a phallical argument, right? It's this like either or kind of a thing. So why are young men killing? You and I were young men. I had sin in my heart, so to speak, as a young dude. I shoplifted stuff. I remember I lied. I freaking cheated on tests. I never hurt anybody. I never wanted to hurt anybody. And I've thought about this. Like, I remember even when you're a young testosterone fueled guy, and depending on the factors in your life, we've all seen like a young man lose his temper. I punched holes in things as a kid, broke shit. I remember being rage filled, not knowing how to communicate or get all those emotions channeled into something. But never in a million years did I want to, I'm going to go fucking kill a bunch of kids, or I'm going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, that thought never in a million years would have crossed my mind. Maybe
for most of us, it would have.
Yeah, maybe I'll smash something. But there's something that's happened to us as a people. People talk about the good old days all the time. I hear it this past week on the 4th of July. We always host a big party. Uncles, aunts, relatives are over, as well as family members. And I'm hearing my father and an uncle talk, and they're talking about the good old days. I didn't interrupt them, but I always think, the good old days where you could smack the shit out of your wife and nobody said anything. The good old days where you took a belt and beat your kid till there was black and blue marks and welts and possibly broken bones on them. The good old days where somebody that God put a bunch of pigment in their skin could get their ass beat. Here's a quick good old day story. Cicero, Illinois, not that fucking long ago, 1950s. Black family moves into Cicero, which is a suburb right outside of Chicago. They buy or rent an apartment, and go look up this story. It will make you want to punch people. And the man bought his wife a piano. He was a hardworking dude. They're on like the 3rd or 4th floor. Well, whiteys don't like it. They say, you're not moving in here. And they move in. Well, I believe police chief, I believe the sheriff of Cook County, there was a bunch of law enforcement there and hundreds of people. They broke into the apartment, threw all their stuff, including the piano that this man had purchased for his wife, out the window, burned all their shit, and said, get out of town. That was just like 60, 70 years ago. That's the good old days. That's not in freaking central Mississippi or Alabama or North Florida. Right. That's not in Georgia. That's in the North. That's in Chicago, Illinois. And I do not believe in systemic racism. I'm sorry if anybody disagrees with me. I don't believe in it. I believe there are racist ass people from all over the globe of all different skin colors. But I tell that story because people have this concept of the good old days. Go read about it.
There were issues back then too.
But there's something different now. And I don't want to blame it on video games. I don't want to blame it on movies. I don't want to blame it on dads not being good dads. I don't want to blame it on lack of religion in schools. I don't want to blame it on a morally corrupt society. I don't want to blame it on moms not reading to their kids at night. I think it's all those things. I think that we have lost our way. There's always going to be bad eggs. There's always going to be a puppy out of a litter that's going to bite people for no reason. And then what you do is you remove that puppy from the earth or from your home or whatever. We used to have mental hospitals full of people, which I don't know if that's where we go back to. Those people are walking the streets now. We have introduced all manner of chemical cocktails to the human brain to deal with depression. It's well known that to sit and look at the sunset creates a parasympathetic state in the human body. It causes you to relax. It's well known. It's well known that to gaze at the mountains off in the distance causes your blood pressure to drop and your heart rate to drop and your respiration rate to lower. This is well proven shit. This is why we go to the beach and stare off at the ocean. It makes us feel good. Yet we have created a world where we are virtually bombarded by a million bits of information every second. We're constantly under a state of duress. We're constantly under a state of needing to be rushed to do things. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others. She's got bigger boobs. He's got bigger biceps. She's got bigger butt cheeks. He's got a better car. His business looks better than mine. The fact is, most of it's fucking lies on top of it, right? I've got 300,000 people that follow me on YouTube. I could push a button tomorrow or in 10 seconds that deleted every bit of it. What does that mean? I've got 105,000 or something people that follow us on Instagram. I could push a button tomorrow, or I could write something super inflammatory and it all goes away. So
that's all it takes nowadays.
It's fickle, right? It's fickle. And we are so concerned with what others think. Why are we killing each other and why is this shit happening? Because I think we have lost our ability to connect. We're stardust, man. We are made of the same shit that's in a meteorite. Whatever you think made you, God, the universe, happenstance or chance, the raw elements that course through our veins are the same things that are in the dirt, the same things that are in an ant, the same things that are in the bison or an eagle. It's pretty powerful. And we have so removed ourselves from the natural world and live now in this digital space that I don't know if we understand up and down and right and wrong. I'm a man. I have a penis. I cannot become a woman. And I don't care if you want to become a woman, do that. But don't tell me that I need to identify you as a woman. I mean, that's like saying my dog is now a unicorn. No, it's a freaking dog. Or that my Ford truck is now a Chevy. And we've made being out of shape beautiful. We have said if somebody's overweight, that's just how they are. No, and I'm not making fun of somebody or bashing on being overweight. We eat diets full of garbage. We don't exercise. A friend of mine just read me a DOD report, Department of Defense report. Check this out. And this all of it's pointing to what we're talking about. Crazy stat from the DOD Human Performance Conference recently held in DC. 70% of Americans aged 17 to 24 are physically unqualified for military service, and the percentage is going up every year. The senior leaders said that they had no idea where the new force was going to come from. The numbers get worse when looking at the 24 to 35-year-old bracket. Travel the world, go to a place like Japan, and you don't see that as much, although it's changing there now. Great book to read, Blue Zones. There's 5 blue zones on the planet. And if I'm getting too talky and you want to jump in, just tell me to shut up.
I know, you're fine.
The blue zones, as described in this book, are places where we have folks living over 100 years or to 100 in a predominantly larger percentage than anywhere else on the globe. There's like 5 places that this is identified. Japan, I mean, an area of Japan being one of them. One of them's in Northern California, actually.
Wow.
The Guanacaste Peninsula of Costa Rica, which is a place I visit often, is Hero Academy. Shout out to them. There's a cool organization there that supports the local youth using jiu-jitsu as a way to help them create good lives and helps them get educations. But the Guanacaste Peninsula, if you look at their diet, you wouldn't think it's an amazing diet. Fish, meats, lots of starches. They drink alcohol. They eat good food, but they They work hard, but they go to the beach. They watch the sunset. They walk a lot. They laugh their asses off. In Costa Rica, their motto is Pura Vida, like live a good life, be well. It's like, aloha in Hawaii, or we say, see you later. They say Pura Vida. And they're permeating through them is a life of gratitude for being alive.
Mm-hmm.
They're fit. You look at an old man and you can see muscles and sinew. You don't see a big belly. You see veins in their arms because they're working. They're pulling nets. They're cutting. They're whatever it is they're doing it. And they eat to eat. They're not eating to just stuff their face. They're fueling their body. Why are we killing ourselves? Because we have so disconnected from what is real. That is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
These men don't know how, and I could be way off base. I think we have so disconnected from reality. The great philosopher and writer Thomas Carlyle said, silence is the element in which great things fashion themselves together. You can go read the whole transcript of where that came from. He went on to say more, but silence is the element in which great things fashion themselves together. If you look at the time when Thomas Carlyle wrote that, this is the same time Emerson and other philosopher poets of that time were leaving the city and going out into the wild and reconnecting. The Industrial Revolution was happening. Cities were becoming smog filled. People were complaining about cars and trains and all that. And they yearned for what they knew, nature. Yosemite Valley is like a place that came about very much because of that. President Roosevelt, he understood it. We have so disconnected. And then what do we do to our kids? I've got a granddaughter. Broke my heart the other day. My daughter handed her 15-month-old a phone to preoccupy her at a family party. It's not my kid. I'm not going to tell her how to raise her, but I just said, she doesn't need that. Like it's a drug. I have no alerts on my phone.
It is. It has become like a drug, and it is kind of sad because I see people do that with their kids a lot.
Jeff, you and I are proliferating it too. You and I are proliferating it. You are creating more content to be consumed, and I do the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, I think you're right. I mean, and especially with kids, I mean, because it just becomes so easy. Like if they start getting antsy, give them a screen, and on one hand, I understand why, but on the other hand, I think that what you're saying has a lot of truth to it because there is something different from back in the good old days, even though there were issues back then too. And I think the fact that we can so easily disconnect from reality, or actually I'll even say take on another form of reality through our phones, through our screens. And if we're being bombarded by violence, by fear, by all the things that you listed off, how could that not create some type of mental illness contagion that might motivate some people to shoot at a crowd? Or maybe if they don't even go that far, what kind of person does that turn into, right? I mean, but the thing is, I don't see how to solve that problem because, like you said, like you and I doing what we do contributes to that. And yes, we're trying to talk more about these issues and serious issues and trying to bring some reality to the situation, but most content doesn't do that.
So look at Christ said it. Every great thinker that I can think of that thought on the topic said it. A man is what he thinks about all day long.
Yeah.
As a man thinketh, so shall he be.
So shall he become. Yeah.
And you have no choice but to. If all day long I think about being a loser, I'm probably going to be a loser. If every time a problem comes to me and I look at it like I'm not going to fix that, I'm just going to fucking fail like I always do, it's probably what's going to happen. If every time a problem comes, I say, I got this, I'm a winner, I'm going to sort it out. Of course, we got to apply action to something, not just thought. But if all I'm looking at is, it doesn't even need to be violence. It can just be whatever you're bombarded with. And we, again, another blanket statement, the media. Well, you and I are the media. By that, I mean, we're pumping more shit onto the internet to consume people's thoughts. The solution is the individual. And that is, I think, the synopsis of liberty. That is what our founders wanted. You to be able to make that choice. And I had a tearful day a couple weeks ago. I'm not a crier, but I'm sitting by the Delaware River. I'm in New Jersey on the border of Pennsylvania and Delaware, and I'm renting an Airbnb. I was teaching a class in New Jersey, and visiting some friends in Pennsylvania. I rented an Airbnb, and I knew when I rented it that it was on the Delaware River, but I didn't know until I pulled in. I was literally at Washington's crossing, like 100 feet from where Washington crossed the Delaware. So I pulled in at night, and I'm looking at signs, and I'd never had been there. So I'm like, oh, this is really cool. If you guys don't know that are listening or watching what the significance of that is, if it wasn't for the night on Christmas night, 1776, that Washington and the Army crossed the Delaware, there'd be no America. So one of the mornings as I was driving into Princeton for class, I left early and I drove out onto, there's a park, and it's really just a big grassy field. And it is where the troops, as they crossed that night in a horrible blizzard, these guys are shoeless. They've got no winter clothes. They've been out in rain and snow for days. They're dying. And they crossed and they regulated into this field. They got there and got all their gear together and went to fight the Hessians, which by history's account is the most trained force on earth at the time. So a bunch of barefoot dudes are going, after spending the night in the rain, to cross the river to go fight the Hessians. They got a 10-mile march after all of this. These dudes are freezing to death. They've got no food. They can't light fires. Now they got a 10-mile march. Then when they get there, they've got to fight guys that have been in warm beds all night, guys that have been fed, and all they have is their bayonets because all their powder is freaking wet. And they did it. So I sat there and I'm looking at this field. I just jumped out of my truck and kind of sat on my tailgate for a minute. And I sent my mom a message. I just said, thank you for cutting the cords off of our television. And I have to give you some context because you're like, what the hell did you just say? So when we were kids, my mother so hated TV, she would take scissors and literally cut the power cord. She'd cut the power cord right off the TV. I'm not an idiot. I can strip some wires and put a couple wire nuts on something. But this is what my mom would do. Go outside. And as a kid, I thought, quit ruining this. I'm trying to watch TV, right? We were not, TV was always like a taboo thing in our house. We all watched it when we could, but my mom would literally destroy my father's TV, and he'd come home and want to watch TV, and he'd be like, who the hell cut the cord off the TV? So I just sat there, and this was my point, full circle, 20, 30, 40 years later after the fact, I'm sitting on this tailgate. I stay in nice Airbnbs when I travel, and I realized this Airbnb I'm at's got like a 70-inch TV on the wall. I didn't turn it on. I chose to instead sit on my tailgate and stare at a dew-covered field with a fog hanging over it, watching the water on the river. I chose that not because I'm smart or something, but that's what was inputted into me. My mother took me to
that's how you were raised. Yeah.
My mother my mother took me to these places and told me these stories. My mother took me to these places and exposed me to these things. And warm tears were flowing down my face as I was laughing because it was just like so silly and so pure and so simple of like, like, you know, they're full circle there it becomes. And here I am as a mid-40s man alone, sitting in the morning, looking at this scene, pondering everything I just told you about this crossing. And because my mother was willing to destroy TVs, and I'm not suggesting that that's the right thing to do or whatever, but it's an individual thing. We constantly look to government to fix our problems. And that is never what the founders intended. The government in our Constitution is not there to feed us, clothe us, house us. They're there to protect our right to do those things ourselves. And we, as a society, Franklin Roosevelt did us no service after the Great Depression, creating this New Deal, this massive expansion where we now feel like I have a right to health care. No, you fucking don't. I have a right to child care. Yeah, if you ask your mother-in-law to watch your kid, nobody told you to put a dick inside of you. And I'm sorry if that sounds horrible to people. That's not what our government ever existed for. We created this place to live free. And of course, that dick in you goes both ways. That was for men and women, so I don't want ladies getting pissed off. But we have given up what this concept of liberty truly means. But with it does come responsibility. Liberty and responsibility are like a two-sided equation. You can't have one. I can be as free as a bird out in the middle of the ocean and I will die, right? So I need to have the responsibility to take a ship with me out there and pack it full of food. And we want freedom, but we don't want all the responsibility that comes with it.
Yeah, it's harder. I mean, it's easier to just let a government take care of you and to do what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, the way that we advocate for ultimately is more beneficial, but it's also a lot more difficult. So here's my last question then. How is there a way to get out of this? Is there a way to change this trend? Is there something that we could be doing to get people to wake up to what's happening, or is it just going to have to play out?
Has the ship gone too far off course?
Yeah.
I am the kind of person, I don't know if it's born into you or if it's learned. I think for me it's learned and somewhat born into me, but I don't believe that there's ever a lost cause. Let's go back to the story on Christmas Eve. 1776, the Continental Army is done. By all accounts, they're done. They have no money. The soldiers that have joined, their term of service is almost done. They're going to go home. These guys aren't getting paid. Their farms are unkept. Their families don't have dads at home. It's over. The Congress doesn't have money. At the same time that these guys are out freezing to death, they've lost over and over and over again. Previously, they had to run from the British Army in New York. There's a fisherman named John Glover. John Glover and his marble headers. John was a fisherman, self-made, became a merchant. And John is somebody worth reading about. John, whose grave one day I'll visit. John was with Washington through many very important moments when he had to flee from when the Continental Army had to flee in New York. If it wasn't for John Glover, 5-1 odds, the Continental Army's escaping through a marsh, and John Glover and his men, 5-1 odds, held back the British and Hessian forces for hours while the Continental Army retreated. Had he not been capable of doing that, the war would have been done there because Howe's troops were ready to just slaughter the Americans. Fast forward to that Christmas night, Washington says we got to get across this river. He says we can't. Like, nobody's crossing this river. It's full of ice. We've got no boats. He says, figure it out. So he goes upriver, basically steals bunches of these wooden barges that are used to move coal and not coal, but heavy goods up and down the rivers, grains and ore and things of that nature. He commandeers them for the revolution, much to the chagrin of the owner, because he basically put this guy's business into bankruptcy. So there's stories like that in our history. Washington planned this out. It was such a tight timeline that if anything went wrong, they were screwed. And once they got across that river, this wasn't a boat of a couple dudes. This wasn't like, okay, you get across and you're done. This took hours. Mm-hmm. John Glover put this thing together like clockwork, and these guys are going across boatload after boatload at a time, boatload at a time. Finally, enough men are gotten across that, and this took way too long. Washington says, we got to go. We got to march. So they march. They do this 10-mile march. They come upon a lookout post, and one of Washington's men, very much like a special operations soldier today, takes off with a few dudes, and they broke into this cottage and killed the sleeping Hessian soldiers so that those guys didn't sound the alarm, which at that time probably would have been a cannon that they set off to warn the Hessians in town. So just that one thing, had they not snuck in and stopped these guys, the plan would have been over. They snuck in and basically murdered in their sleep these Hessian sentries. 10-mile march in a blizzard, a downpour of snow and ice and rain and wind. They get into town. They storm in with bayonets and took over a much more trained and much more superior force. The colonel of that Hessian force was killed in battle by a sharpshooter. One of the young boys in Washington's army shot him while on horseback, knowing if we can take that guy out who's trying to muster his men, we'll end the battle. We took all those guys captive. We captured all their musket, all their shot, all their powder. John Glover was responsible for that happening. And John Glover looks at Washington and says, okay, these guys got to rest. General says, fuck no. We're about to march right back to the river, and we're going to cross right back into Pennsylvania. And John says, you're nuts, General. Like, what are you talking about? We can't do that. Washington said, not one man will sleep or eat until we're back on the safety of the other side of the river, because now they were trapped with the British Army to the east and the river to the west. And Washington knew if we don't put that river between us, we're at great stake of losing.
Right.
I'm telling this story because it all seems so impossible and so insurmountable. Our revolution is full of hundreds of such stories. John got all those men back across the river. I do believe we didn't lose one man in that attack. I believe that to be correct. Oh, wow. Go do some research on it. He gets them all across. It wasn't a huge victory in the big scheme of the revolution, but what it did was it changed the hearts of the men involved. The citizen soldiers that had been freezing, they saw we can do this. They saw we have the ability to affect change in the world around us. We can march when we're cold. We can fight with merely a bayonet. We can continue when we think we can't. And I think that is the lessons that are learned in these stories. Men no smarter or stronger than you or I. Men no more gifted or talented than anybody listening. People that believed in this common cause of liberty and freedom. And I think that is, so can we change the course of the ship? Well, I think by and large, most of the colonies thought that the revolution would have never been won. Only 56 dudes put pen to paper signing the Declaration. Yeah. Not 5,000, but 56. Nothing changes until you make it change. That's what I always told my kids. Of course, things change all around us without our input, but in the context of self, and of course we're going to age, we'll get older, but you don't change until you apply action. That is what is, in the end, all we can do. I can't change my neighbor. I could run for mayor and try to affect things. I could run for city council or Congress or president, and you can make change, but still the only thing that we can do is change ourselves. And in that, just like what Glover did, what Washington did, what Knox did in these stories, they stirred the hearts and minds of others. So my challenge would be, what can you do? Not just you, but anybody listening. What can you, the individual, do that stirs the guts of those around you? And that requires leadership. That requires you to be a leader in your community, in your family, in your neighborhood, at your job, in your police department, in whatever it is you do. And it doesn't mean a leader like follow me. This shirt says facta non verba, the shirt I'm wearing. Facta non verba means deeds, not words.
Oh.
Show me. Don't tell me, motherfucker. Show me. Live it. Yep. And I think that is too often the issue. So Can we change this? 1000% we can, but it requires a few. The firestorm that the 56 men that signed that declaration started is alive today. It's a glowing ember. It was a firestorm that swept across the world because the concept of liberty was not much of a thing in many places, and now it is
No, it
because
wasn't.
a small contingent decided to do something. So if they can do it, so can we. And if it wasn't for them, then who? Who would have done it? So today, if not you or me, then who? Who will carry that load of liberty on our behalf? That is, I think, the question that we should ask ourselves. So, can we stop killing each other? Yeah, I think we can. I think it starts with us caring enough about ourselves to pull our heads out of our phones, pull our heads out of the internet, pull our heads out of fear-filled clouds, and begin to understand that our life is fleeting and fickle, and that we should live and love and laugh and enjoy and stand up for what's fucking right.
Amen. And I think that's a good place to leave it. But before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Carry Trainer, CarryTrainer.com is our website. We're on YouTube, Carry Trainer, Instagram, Facebook. If you just punch in Carry Trainer, Twitter, all that jazz. We've got classes up, and we are pretty easy to access. I really appreciate you giving me the time to chat. I know I bogarted a bunch of your airtime, Jeff.
That's actually how I do it. I keep it more conversational. It's more about the insights that you have. So that was good.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Thank you.